Hi, Ken Boyer with Garage Gurus. Today I have a tech tip on charging system diagnostic procedures. If you're experiencing issues with voltage readings, flickering lights, or charging system warning lights, you need to follow these test procedures to see if the alternator is operating properly. To begin, I'm going to check the voltage at the batteries and again at the alternator with the engine at idle. I'm going to turn off all the loads because I want to see if the alternator is providing the necessary current to operate the truck at idle along with maintaining battery charging voltage. I'm going to go ahead and start the truck. I'm going to check the voltage at the batteries, and I should see at least 13.8 volts. Okay, so like I said, I've got the engine at idle. I've turned off all the loads. I'm going to go ahead and hook up my voltmeter and get a battery reading. So I'm going to put my negative lead on the negative post. I'm going to put the positive lead on the positive post, and I've got 12.6 volts. Okay, as you saw, we had 12.6 volts at the battery. So now I want to check the voltage at the positive post on the alternator. So as you can see, we have 12.4 volts. So now we need to move on to the voltage drop test. Okay, so as we discussed, if the idle voltage is greater than or equal to 13.8 volts at the battery, then we need to conduct a voltage drop test. So I basically have simulated a vehicle here. I've got a battery, I've got a starter, and I've got an alternator. And then I'm going to apply the load with a load tester. So the first thing I want to show you is, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go through the positive cable, but I've got a positive cable coming from the battery to the positive post on the solenoid, and then I've got my alternator wire positive lead coming from the starter over to the positive lead on the alternator. So we'll check that one first. Same with the negative side. I got a negative cable going to the negative post on the starter, and then I got a rather long one here, but it's the long cable going to the ground post from the starter ground post to the alternator. So I've got it set up just like it would be on the vehicle, and we're going to test it as it is. So the first thing I want to do is hook up my load tester. So I'm going to go ahead and just go to ground on the case for the load tester. See if I can get that to set there right. And then I'm going to hook up the positive side. You're going to hear the fan come on the tester, but I'm going to go ahead and hook this to the positive post on the alternator. So the next thing I want to do is turn on my voltmeter to volts DC. I'm going to hit min max, so that way I record what the reading is. I'm going to hook up my positive lead for the voltmeter onto the battery positive post, because remember we're doing the positive circuit. So I'm going to hook up my negative lead of the voltmeter onto the positive cable at the alternator. So remember, I've got it set up here easy for demonstration to show you how it works. But if I was on a truck, if I needed to do it on the truck, I've got quite a distance to cover. So you'd probably end up using some extendable test lead, something like this, in order to reach the distances that you need to with your voltmeter. So right now, my alternator is rated at 165 amps. So I'm going to go ahead and load this circuit with 165 amps, and you're going to see the reading on the voltmeter. I'm going to go ahead and apply the carbon pile, apply the load. I'm going to go up to 165. Then I'm going to back it off so it stays cool. I'm going to look at my voltmeter, and I got 0.2 of a volt for the voltage drop for that circuit. So the next test I want to make is the voltage drop on the negative side. So I'm going to go ahead and reset my voltmeter. I'm going to put it on the min max. I'm going to take my positive lead for the voltmeter and put it on the negative post of the battery. And then I'm going to take my negative lead of the voltmeter and put it on the negative cable on the case of the alternator. So I'm going to go ahead and apply the load again because I left my load tester on. So I'm going to go ahead and apply the same thing, 165 amps. And then I'm going to back it off, keep that thing cool. I'm going to look at my voltmeter, and I don't even have barely 1/10 of a volt. So I'm going to go ahead and disconnect the load tester, and that way it goes quiet. So basically, if you remember the numbers, on the positive side I had 0.2 volts, and on the negative side I had barely 1/10 of a volt. So with those together combined, both cables combined, I should not exceed 1/2 volt or 0.5 volts. So because I'm less than 0.5 volts, these cables are fine and they're okay to use. But if you have more than 0.5 volts, so for example, if I'd have had 0.2 volts on the positive cable and 0.6 volts on the negative cable, you need to repair or replace the cable with the 0.6 volts, which we said would have been the negative cable. So you can't go over 0.5 volts combined together. So we're okay here. So with the voltage drop test completed, there's one more test that we need to do to verify the alternator is performing as designed. We need to do an alternator output test with the truck running wide open throttle and make sure that the alternator can produce its rated amperage. So we're going to do that by hooking up our load tester to the battery. And then after that, we're going to take our amp clamp and we're going to put our amp clamp on the alternator, on the positive cable, right up next to the alternator. But the problem is with the truck, you can't really see where I'm going to hook this up. So I've got a loose engine and a test stand, and we're going to go over to that engine and I'll show you where to hook up the amp clamp. All right, so I had mentioned that I had an engine that we could look at without the frame rail in the way. So here's the power cable coming into the alternator from the battery. I'm just going to take my amp clamp, I'm going to put it on the cable, and I'm going to make sure I'm as close to the alternator as possible. So now let's go back over to the truck and we'll test the truck at high idle. Okay, so we just got back from the engine where I showed you how to hook up the amp clamp on the alternator. So I'm going to do the same thing right now on the truck. I'm going to go ahead and turn my amp clamp on. I'm going to hit min max and I'm going to put it on the cable, the power cable, as close to the alternator as I can. Okay, I'm on the cable. So the next thing I want to do, I'm going to load the alternator. So I want to go ahead and take my carbon pile, my load tester. I'm going to go ahead and hook it up. So I'm going to hook the ground on. I'm going to go ahead and put the power on, or the positive on. Once I do that, I'm going to tell my colleague to go ahead and start the truck. And then we're going to take it to wide open throttle, and I'm going to load the battery, load the alternator, and check its maximum output. So go ahead and start it. Okay. Go ahead and go to wide open throttle. Go down. Okay. Go ahead and shut it off. So now I need to check my amp clamp and get the reading for the maximum output this alternator can do. Okay, so I just took the amp clamp off. I've got a 165 amp alternator and I got 38 amps under a full load. So the alternator is not meeting its requirements for maximum amperage and it should be replaced. Hopefully this tech tip helps you with diagnosing the charging system problem. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. I'm Ken Boyer with Garage Gurus. Thanks for watching.